Alright, y'all, welcome back to Combat Arms channel. Alright, so today we're checking out a video that I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen already, and if not, just go ahead and prepare yourself. This is definitely one of the most brutal videos that I've seen from the Ukraine war, if not just like combat in general. This is some very brutal footage. So basically what it contains is a Ukrainian soldier who was fighting, ended up putting down his weapon as he was approaching a building, and ended up getting into hand-to-hand combat with a Russian troop. And then you can see in this exchange, a knife comes out, and that's kind of where both of these fighters exchange most of their wounds. And then the Ukrainian fighter ends up losing his life to these injuries that he sustained in this combat. And why this video is so remarkable, for lack of a better term, you know, why it's kind of going around the internet so much is, of course, you have the violence and kind of just what we see in war, kind of like the worst aspects of war. But also towards the end, you kind of see the humanity aspect. And they actually did an interview with the Russian soldier who was in this video, which we'll check out as well. But you do see kind of like that humanity aspect coming into play as well. But yeah, it's pretty brutal. I will say I was definitely on the fence if I was going to react to this or not, just because again, just kind of out of respect for the Ukrainian soldier who lost his life. But I do think we have a lot of interesting things to talk about, if not just a lot of discussion, because at least with this video specifically, more than any other video I've seen from this war, you have a lot of people who are really understanding what war is and how brutal it can actually be. And this is, again, just a very prime example of how that is, because you'll have combat footage where people are kind of just talking about, you know, like me, where I kind of break down the tactics or things like that, or, you know, kind of like the geopolitical aspect of it. But this, all the comments are about just war itself and what it means to be in a war and what war actually looks like. And I think this really opened a lot of people's eyes to, you know, what was the point for this entire conflict starting in the first place? You know, kind of like the senseless moving into Ukraine and, you know, kind of what it's resulting in now. A lot of people are kind of like, it's opened their eyes, it's opened their perspective, and a lot of people seem to be thinking a lot more in depth as to what it really meant for this war to be happening and what it meant for both sides. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get into it. And of course, let me know your thoughts as we're kind of commenting on everything, because there certainly are a lot of talking points and I'm not necessarily going to hit all of them just in my kind of commentary. So as you can well imagine, when it comes to kind of hand-to-hand combat, you have this soldier who's in kind of like this destroyed environment or this destroyed town. So he's approaching this building here, and you can kind of see, again, like unless somebody's like really kind of poking out the window, you can kind of see it's all dark. You have a lot of shadows, which is why like snipers and stuff will usually place themselves like further into the building. So you can't really see a whole lot as you're approaching it. And again, just kind of going through this threshold here, one, it's not going to be easy because of the, you know, all the rubble and stuff on the ground. So you kind of just have to watch your footing. But just approaching all of this, once you get through here, it opens up so many different danger areas. So you're kind of just trying to take in everything at once. It's a lot for your mind to process, and realistically, you're not going to process all of it. There's a lot of luck when it comes to an environment like this and moving into something like this, like a little courtyard. So he's watching his footing, taking it cautiously, and then starts taking fire. So I don't know if he was actually hit right here, to be honest. I've looked up a lot of comments and whatnot, and most of it, understandably, is going to be about the hand-to-hand combats. But yeah, again, he's taking fire. It's hard to see anything inside the building, but he takes some rounds, at least in his direction. And again, just looking at the ground, even if he didn't get hit, just maintaining your footing is going to be so difficult here. But he's still firing back. He's firing at the window where, you know, the rounds were perceived to have come from. Okay, so yeah, he is hit. Now we're talking about hand-to-hand combat. Like, you're going to be exhausted moving into hand-to-hand combat. Just moving through any sort of environment like this, it's going to be physically taxing. But with the adrenaline already, just being in combat, you're already going to be huffing and puffing like pretty significantly. But to get wounded at that point, so now you're not just fighting like the actual physical exhaustion and like kind of the adrenaline dump, you're fighting an actual wound that you have already sustained, which, somebody could potentially use that to their advantage against you. But again, you're fighting that at this point because you don't necessarily have all the same kind of like biomechanical advantages that you would have. Say if you got hit in the shoulder, your entire arm is essentially out of play. And certain things are going to be much more difficult, if not impossible, like wrapping your arm around somebody. So I'm not exactly sure where he was hit at this point. But again, it's a crappy thing to get wounded and then have to go into hand-to-hand combat. But that just goes to show like the amount of adrenaline and how much it really, when you're fighting for your life, I mean, that's it. You're going to give everything that you have. And it's just insane to see the amount of exertion that we still see, in this hand-to-hand combat. Okay, so I know I'm not trying to pause it too much, but again, there's a lot of things to look at. So he has a grenade and he's opting to quickly move up to the building to just kind of throw the grenade in there. And that would essentially, remove all of his problems, if there was somebody inside who's attacking him. But there's a lot of danger in approaching a building, especially that you're just taking fire from, with your grenade, especially approaching it from the same direction that you were previously, because he could potentially be getting shot at right now. But in this case, it's significantly worse because now the attacker, I guess the defender, comes outside of the building, and because we saw him put his weapon down, now he can't react to that. And because he doesn't have like a buddy who's kind of providing cover, this is where everything kind of goes down. So he saw him coming. You can kind of hear his reaction. He saw him coming, and he did a great job of kind of just putting himself close to the wall. And, we have the defender who, if they kind of stepped back a little bit, just kind of like back here and kind of like went around the wall, it would have been harder for the Ukrainian to quickly grab his muzzle and kind of react to that. Essentially, he would have had to just run around the other side of the building. But because that muzzle is there, then you have the Ukrainian reacting to it, which is why a lot of times when you're talking about like CQB training, you don't want kind of, if you're going into a room, you want to kind of have your muzzle driving the corner already. So if there is somebody in the corner, they can't grab your muzzle like that. And we can see he does a great job of just quickly taking advantage of this. As he's already, the dude is already firing. So again, like they immediately fall to the ground because at this point he's just trying to make sure that this guy can't point the AK at him or his rifle at him. He's trying to get that out of play, so he's trying to control that. And then with all we have here, it's hard. Again, it's hard to maintain your footing when the ground looks like this. So they end up falling. It looks like you have the Ukrainian kind of on his back with the Russian essentially like between his legs almost, which is an advantageous position for the Ukrainian. However, we see a knife coming out very quickly. Which, defending from a knife, it sucks. A lot of times you'll see a lot of people, usually with like the bullshito, as they say, you'll see a lot of people who have these like end all be all, like fix any sort of problem. Somebody has a knife at you, they can disarm it super easy within like fraction of a second. That's not the case. And if you talk to anybody who's, especially like someone who has been in an environment like that, especially someone who is in like a kind of like a crime-ridden area, who grew up in a crime-ridden area, or certain like police officers, or even people who do like Krav Maga, there's certain things that you kind of understand that when you're fighting against a knife, it's not fine motor skills. All that fine motor skill nonsense goes out the window almost immediately. You're not going to be like quickly grabbing wrist and doing all these things, because when somebody's using a knife, they're going to be using it in a multitude of ways. I mean, just looking at this, when you're doing knife training, you're never training where the person is like between your legs and they start basically stabbing back at you. So it's not a lot of fine motor skills at that point. It's basically just trying to control their hand to keep the knife from going towards you, or if it is coming towards you, using as many like big things like your arms, your forearms, just using as much as possible to keep it from hitting everything that's important. So like kind of like your head, your neck. But of course, in that process, your hands are absolutely going to get cut up. Your forearms are going to get cut up, and it sucks. I mean, if you've ever just even like cut yourself, it sucks. A laceration hurts a lot. When you're talking about something like this, of course, the adrenaline, yeah, it's going to be helping you. But if your hands start getting cut up, that's going to wear on you. And then when you can't even like grab something, it's like there's not a whole lot of fight left in you that you can do with your hands. So you're just trying to use everything that you can. And it's such a, just watching it happen, I think is what's so brutal, is you just kind of see the ability to fight back gets harder and harder because he's sustaining these cuts, especially when you start seeing the cuts on the hands or the bites. So he's trying to control with his legs. Again, they're fighting for the knife, and the Ukrainian gets the knife. But like, again, the switching of the hands, moving to a non-dominant hand. And the Russian actually ends up grabbing the blade of the knife, which, I mean, do what you need to do. I mean, if you're taking cuts, you're going to start grabbing whatever you can to stop those cuts. And if you happen to just grab the blade and it's working for you, then, you can do that. But my gosh, you start seeing their hands just get super cut up, and then you start seeing like the knife kind of just it started going back and forth. So the Russian had it, then the Ukrainian had it, and then we'll see that it actually gets transferred back over to the Russian. From grabbing the blade, look at that. Golly. And then the Russian, he ends up taking his helmet off, which is not something that I would ever try to do or think to do, just because like having body armor, especially a helmet, like, yeah, it weighs on you, but it's less things to worry about. You're not worrying about like this entire part of your head getting stabbed, because obviously if you start taking stabs to the head, that's going to suck. If you start getting stabs to like your chest, your lungs, obviously you want to avoid that. Even like your rib cage, you don't want to have any stabs there. So like having body armor and stuff sounds like, an advantageous thing, but he actually ends up taking his helmet off. Now with his helmet off, he's got a little bit more kind of freedom of like movement to bite more effectively, which again, when you're talking about like survival, kind of like, fight to the death, you're not going to fight fair. There's not going to be anything pretty about it. You're going to have people biting chunks out of you. You're going to have people just grabbing things and yanking as much as possible, muscle gouging, eye gouging, everything is up for grabs when you're talking about this, which is why it's so brutal and so primal. And it's just not something that you would like to ever see. But again, like with kind of what we're seeing with everybody having a GoPro, we're seeing more and more of this like really close combat, really personal stuff. So it kind of, again, opens our eyes to what this war is really looking like. And I don't know who his buddy is, but if we saw this footage of his buddy in hand-to-hand combat yelling his call sign, that's got to be tough. Golly, and that knife. Jeez, I mean, you can just see the blood just going down his face. But now the Russian is kind of kneeling. If he wants, he could, even stand up. And at that point, obviously, that's the more advantageous position. But, that ability to fight back has kind of left the Ukrainian at this point, which is really, it's so brutal to see that. But again, now we're kind of seeing a little bit of the humanity where it's like, he's saying, let me breathe a little. It hurts to breathe. And now we can see he's not just, still attacking him with a knife. He's kind of just like, he's let it go kind of thing. And, it sounds kind of silly, but I don't know if you've been in like, a fist fight with somebody, at least with me, whenever I've been in like a fist fight or something, it's obviously it was never to the death. It was never meant to like kill somebody. But, just fist fighting somebody after the fact, it's like, okay, yeah, like, whatever we were fighting about was kind of stupid. Like, let's just, go about our day. And in a weird way, this is kind of very similar, like psychologically speaking. It's just unfortunate that this was actually like a fight to the death. And now we can kind of see that they're kind of saying their piece and, parting ways here.
Да, я уйду спокойно. Не то, что все. Да, я умру. Та не просто мене кажуть, дай помру. Уйди, пожалуйста. Я хочу померти сам. Спасибо тобі. Ти був учим битися у мірі.
I just like the compliment, like, you were the better fighter. I feel really privileged to be able to kind of like see this video. And of course, like to kind of have a platform to basically showcase this for everybody so they can kind of understand what it looks like and what this Ukrainian fighter's last moments were like, as brutal as they were. But again, just kind of seeing what was important to each other at the end, which is basically just like, you are the better fighter in this situation. But, this is how it's ended for us. It's been very brutal, and now they're kind of just, saying their piece and parting ways. And yeah, it's a really crappy thing to see, especially when it is this violent, this brutal. But again, seeing what everybody's response to this has been very human, for lack of a better word. Nobody's just kind of saying, oh, like, that was crazy, that was like so cool. Of course there are going to be like some cave dwellers who are going to be saying things like that, who are just like, they only want to focus on like the ultra violent stuff. But, when you're talking about it's war and you're really kind of like, yeah, have the respect for what war and combat is, like, this is really what you can respect the most. It's just how brutal it is and what the fighter at his last moments was kind of experiencing. So kind of just, again, out of respect for the Ukrainian fighter as well, I'm not going to go over like every interview that I've seen, but there's like an hour-long interview out there with the Russian soldier. I think he's actually from Siberia, or a Yakut, if I remember that correctly. But yeah, so there's a lot of interviews, there's a lot of clips out there, but there's just kind of one, kind of him talking about his perspective, kind of what was happening, and also just kind of his thought process during this violence confrontation.
Осколок шифра взял и воткнул ему глаз, вот левый глаз воткнул, а он с боли он опустил ножка.
Golly, and again, like, we were talking about like the biting, we were talking about like eye gouging and whatnot, but using like a shard of glass that was on the ground as like a weapon to basically still get to the main weapon that everybody was fighting over, it really just goes to show like how primal it is. And again, like, you can train as much as you want for like certain knife fighting or hand-to-hand combats, but really it's going to be like, what can I use around me to give myself the advantage? Golly, I can't even imagine taking a glass shard to the eye. Any sort of eye injury alone is like really put you in kind of fight or flight mode. But that must have been so shitty.
Который меня здесь держал, да? Он опустил, я этот нож взял и первый удар сделал здесь ему. Ну, в сторону затылка сделал, а здесь позвоночник же есть. Где позвоночка, от этого скользнул нож.
And I've seen like the clips, he's like really struggling to retell a story. As you can well imagine, I mean, that's got to be a pretty traumatic thing to be in something like that. It's not something that you're going to forget for the rest of your life.
Потом он, короче, уже понял, что он ничего не может делать. И попросил меня и говорит, дай прощаться с небой, дай прощаться с мамой. Ты меня уже убил, говорит. И он сказал, типа, ты лучший боец в мире, спасибо, говорит. Ну, типа, я его когда отпустил, он говорит, спасибо, говорит, дай прощаться с небом. Я ему, ну, у нас с детства, ну, нас, русских якутов, с детства учат же, в любой ситуации надо оставаться человеком.
Again, having to recount a story like that, or, you know, a situation like that, is not going to be easy for anybody. But again, like, it's still kind of like the honor aspect when you're talking about just infantrymen, or, you know, in combat, being in combat with the enemy. You still see that humanity coming out, you know, in times that you wouldn't expect it, especially when there's this much violence in this short amount of time, especially that kind of violence, like really kind of primal violence. But you do still see that kind of honor and humanity coming out. And, you know, at least he's still kind of talking about it. At least as far as I've seen, he's not, you know, bragging or anything like that. But you can well imagine that's going to be a pretty, again, very, very traumatic thing to be a part of. Even like having survived, it's definitely going to leave a pretty heavy impression on you. But yeah, let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this. Again, I was really on the fence if I would react to this or not, but I think there are definitely a lot of talking points for us to kind of pick out from it. Again, you will have those people out there who will focus on who's winning, who actually won this engagement. But really, it's about kind of piecing apart the humanity, but also just the brutality of war itself, and having a firm respect and understanding of what it means for these people to be at war, to be engaging in combat with each other. And you know, this is what it looks like sometimes. And this is, again, just two people's perspective of war. And there are so many out there. We're getting a lot more exposure with these cameras, like the helmet cameras, the GoPros. But there's still so much that you're just not going to see. A lot that you're not going to see on certain social media websites or YouTube, things like that. And, you know, for me, I'm not going to go looking for anything like that. But, you know, when you do get exposed to it, again, just really opens your eyes and kind of shifts your perspective a bit. But definitely let me know your thoughts on this. But yeah, there's really no winners in this kind of situation when you're talking about something like that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Definitely a brutal video, hard to watch. Not one that I try to go back to by any means. This is the third time I've watched it. The first time I was still kind of like trying to process it. The second time I was really trying to like understand what was happening and what they were enduring. And then yeah, this would be the third. And this probably, you know, I don't have any desire to come back to this video, but I think it is pretty interesting to at least open up the dialogue to see what you all think, especially kind of like perspectives from all around the world, people who have been to war, who have been to combat as well, who would also kind of understand that aspect of it. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. And that is it for this video. I'll see you on the next one.